Welcome to the Unstressed Exec, the podcast where we dive deep into the real conversations that help you lead, love, and live with greater clarity, courage, and calm. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, executive coach and clinical forensic psychologist, and I help high-achieving professionals navigate life transitions, resolve conflict with confidence, and build unshakable psychological resilience. So if you're ready to lead with purpose, master conflict with grace, and become more emotionally agile under pressure, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Unstressed Exec, where we talk about how to perform, lead, and live with clarity, calm, and confidence, even when life feels like it's coming apart at the seams. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, forensic psychologist, executive and resilience coach, and someone who has spent decades studying how the mind, the body, and behavior intersect in real relationships, real workplaces, and real lives. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. If these conversations resonate with you and you want practical tools to apply what you're learning, check out my workbook, The Conflict Whisperer, From Conflict to Clarity. It's a no BS, clinically grounded guide designed to help you navigate conflict without losing your cool, at home, at work, or in moments of personal crisis. You can find it on Amazon, and I'll leave a link in the show notes. Okay, today's topic is one I've been meaning to record for a really long time because it fills a gap that I see causing real damage to real families every single week in my coaching practice. We're talking about parenting after separation or divorce, and specifically the critical difference between co-parenting and parallel parenting. Two frameworks that serve very different situations, and that getting confused between them can cost you years of unnecessarily conflict, psychological damage to your children, and serious personal suffering. This episode is titled Parallel Parenting versus Co-Parenting, a clinical framework for high conflict exes. I want to address you directly if you're in this situation. You may be a high-achieving professional or entrepreneur who's built a life, built a family, and now finds yourself navigating the wreckage of a relationship that ended badly, while trying to show up for your kids, keep your business or career intact, and hold yourself together. That is an extraordinary weight. And the advice you're getting from well-meaning people, divorce influencers on social media, or even some legal and therapeutic professionals may be fundamentally misapplied to your specific situation. In today's episode, we're going to fix that. I have 5 fundamental sections I'm going to break this episode down into. And the first, we're going to dive right into why the standard co-parenting model fails in high conflict situations. The co-parenting model has become the dominant cultural framework for divorced or separated parents. And in the right circumstances, it's excellent. Co-parenting at its best looks like 2 adults who have put aside their personal grievances to function as a collaborative parenting team. They attend events together. They communicate openly about the children's needs. They make joint decisions with relative ease, and they basically present a unified front. If your ex is a reasonable person who simply wasn't the right partner for you, co-parenting is achievable and worth working toward. Full stop. No debate. I actually have that relationship with my ex. After 17 years, we both agreed quite reasonably that we were not each other's person. And as a result, we moved on. But in that, we still had great care for one another as the mother and father of our children and just as human beings. And we still approach our post-marital relationship in that way. But here's the rub. If your ex has significant high conflict personality features, narcissism, borderline personality features, paranoia, or chronically adversarial patterns in their functioning, the co-parenting model is not just aspirational. It is actively harmful. Here's why. Co-parenting requires communication, and it also requires a general agreement about the rules of engagement. And every communication channel with a high conflict ex is a potential vector for manipulation, escalation, and harassment. Co-parenting requires joint decision-making. And joint decision-making with a high conflict person is not collaboration. It's a power struggle with your children in the middle. Co-parenting requires good faith. As I said a minute ago, it requires rules of engagement that you both agree to and remain consistent with. And good faith cannot be manufactured by one party alone. When therapists, mediators, and family court systems push high conflict divorced parents toward traditional co parenting, they are often prescribing a medicine that requires a patient the other person simply isn't. The result is not collaboration, it's escalation, and the children absorb every bit of that. So, moving into our next section, what do we do about this? Well, we have to begin by understanding parallel parenting and what's the clinical case for parallel parenting. First, let's start with general definition. Parallel parenting is a model designed specifically for situations where meaningful cooperation between parents is not possible because of one or both parents' personality functioning, or their level of conflict, or their incapacity for good faith engagement. The core principle of parallel parenting is this: you disengage from each other as co parents while remaining fully engaged with your children as individual parents. You do not parent together. You parent alongside each other in parallel with clearly defined boundaries, minimal direct communication, and maximum focus on the child's experience within each household. The goal is the child's well being, not the parent's ego. In clinical terms, this model dramatically reduces the child's exposure to interparental conflict, which decades of research, including landmark work by Joan Kelly and Robert Emery, identifies as the primary driver of negative development outcomes for children of divorce. It is not the divorce itself that harms children most, and I've said this for years. It is the ongoing conflict between parents that the child witnesses, which they're caught between or in which they are triangulated into. That is the most damaging factor for a child. Parallel parenting protects the child's nervous system by eliminating the battleground. So let's talk in this third section about the elements of effective parallel parenting. How is it structured? So let me give you the practical architecture, because this model only works when it's implemented with real structural clarity. And there's a few key points I want to highlight here. First, communicate in writing asynchronously. What do I mean by that? The primary medium for communication with the high conflict X should be written and asynchronous. Co-parenting apps like Our Family Wizard, Talking Parents, or Cozy, C-O-Z-I, are specifically designed for this. They create a documented record, they reduce impulsivity in responses, and they give you the ability to respond when you're regulated rather than when you're reactive. Phone calls are almost always a mistake in high conflict situations. They're harder to document, easier to manipulate, and they put your nervous system in a real-time reactive state that benefits the high conflict person and harms you. This is particularly relevant if your ex is a master manipulator or gaslighter, because they know how to pull your triggers. And if that's the case, and you're finding time and again, every time you talk to them, you're getting sucked back in to old patterns, you need to really think about communicating in writing and asynchronously. Asynchronous simply means it's not a live back and forth. So texting or working through an app is technically asynchronous because when they respond, you have a choice to respond immediately, or you can walk away and come back to your response an hour, a day, 2 days later if you need to. It's asynchronous. A phone call, meeting for coffee, meeting in person is not asynchronous. It's live and interactive. And that leads to more triggers occurring. Second, communicate business only. Every communication with your ex should be treated like a business communication about a shared project. And the project is the well-being of your child. Topics might be logistics, schedules, medical information, school pickup, or school issues. Nothing else. Not feelings, not grievances, not history. The moment you drift into emotional territory, you have given a high conflict ex exactly the engagement that they're looking for, and now they can get that hook to manipulate or gaslight you. BIFF, B-I-F-F, is a useful framework here. when you think about how you're going to engage with your high conflict ex. What does BIFF stand for? Brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Not warm, not apologetic, not defensive. It's business level friendly, it's factual, and it's done. Brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Third, think about a detailed parenting plan. Parallel parenting requires a parenting plan with significantly more specificity than traditional co-parenting arrangements. Remember, rules of engagement. You have to be very clear what those are. Ambiguity is a weapon in the hands of a high conflict ex. Every holiday, every school break, every pickup time, every decision-making domain needs to be spelled out in writing, legally documented, and enforced consistently. Your attorney and potentially a parenting coordinator should be involved in developing this because they know the language, they know the pitfalls, they've seen it all before. Do not rely on verbal agreements or goodwill. They will be used against you with a high conflict ex. Next, pulling in a parenting coordinator. In a genuinely high conflict situation, a parenting coordinator, typically a mental health professional or attorney with specialized training, can be appointed by the court to make binding decisions on disputes that the parents cannot resolve. This removes you from the negotiating table entirely on contested issues, and it inserts essentially a neutral professional. If your situation qualifies for this, it is one of the most effective structural interventions available. Think of the parenting coordinator kind of like a referee. Everyone has already agreed. Everyone has already agreed to the rules of the game, and the parenting coordinator is there to ensure that the rules are followed. Last, under this section, I want to talk about transition management. This is one of the most ripe moments in a parallel parenting or a co-parenting environment where conflict can spike. Custody transitions are the highest risk moments in high conflict co-parenting. They are the moment when both parents are physically present, the children are watching, and when the high conflict parent has the greatest opportunity to escalate. Strategies include neutral transition locations, such as school or a neutral public place, using a third party, such as a grandparent or a trusted adult for pickup and drop off, and minimal to zero direct interaction during transitions. And I just thought of one more: clear expectations for the child about what the transition will look like. Again, these are the rules of engagement, and you're applying them in the most difficult moment that you're likely to see tension flare up, and that's in the transition. For this next section, I want to talk about the psychological cost of high conflict co-parenting and how to protect yourself. So I want to spend a moment on something that doesn't get enough clinical attention. It's the psychological impact on you as the healthier parent in a high conflict post-divorce situation. To many of my coaching clients and some of my therapy clients as well, I will often explain it this way. Unfortunately, you are the adult in the room. For years or months, you have tried to take the high road. You've tried to communicate effectively. You've tried to be reasonable and approach it with a sense of compromise, all for the well-being of your child. And your high conflict ex isn't allowing it. They are gaslighting. They are manipulating. They are pushing your buttons. And in the worst cases, they're weaponizing the child against you. In those moments, you could complain, you could bitch at the stars, but you have to be the adult in the room. You're stuck holding that responsibility. Sustained engagement with a high conflict ex is a chronic stressor. It activates your nervous system on a near constant basis. Every notification, every contested exchange, every court motion is a threat signal that keeps your stress response partially activated. And over time, this produces allostatic load, which is the cumulative wear on your body and brain from chronic stress. This stuff doesn't wash away in the shower. It builds over time. And the research on allostatic load links it to everything from cardiovascular disease to impaired executive functioning to disrupted sleep to increased inflammatory markers. It has a real toll on you emotionally, psychologically, and physically. And you cannot pour from an empty cup. And you cannot parent well from a dysregulated nervous system. Full stop. The structural interventions of parallel parenting, such as limited communication, written exchanges, and reduced direct contact, they're not just legal strategic approaches. They are neurologically protective. Every interaction you don't have with your high conflict ex is a threat that your nervous system doesn't have to process. And I love thinking of it that way. You're eliminating a threat that you don't have to process because you're not stepping in to the gladiator arena with your ex. And if you are on the receiving side of a high conflict ex relationship, my guess is your ex is far better at playing that gladiator game than you are because you just want peace. They don't want peace. So you have to really pay attention to that. Additionally, I strongly encourage individual therapy or coaching during this period, not couples or co-parenting therapy with your ex if they have significant high conflict features. That doesn't work. You just get in the room and they continue to gaslight you. And it takes an extremely skilled and gifted coach or therapist to keep that from happening and staying on track. So if you have a high conflict ex, it's something to reconsider. At some point, do you give up on the couples therapy? Co-parenting therapy with a high conflict personality often becomes another arena for manipulation and escalation. Your work is on yourself, regulating your nervous system, maintaining your own clarity, and building the strongest version of yourself for your children. Related to what I said earlier, you are the adult in the room, and by focusing on these things, you are becoming a stronger adult in the room. So the next thing I want to reflect on is we've talked a bit about the definition of parallel parenting, how we kind of structure that, what that means. We talked about the BIFF method, right? As well as what's the cost of high conflict co-parenting if you do nothing, right? Or you just continue the status quo. There's one other thing I have to talk about before we close for today, and that's talking to your children. What are the clinical guidelines? It's important to remember that children in high conflict divorce situations are navigating an impossible loyalty bind. They love both parents. They are developmentally unable to process adult conflict. They're not there yet, right? They're not adults, and they are exquisitely attuned to parental distress. Think about this. When you are dealing with children under the age of 10, and this can move a couple of years in either direction, even under the age of 12, these kids are basically held hostage to the home. What I mean by that is when conflict spikes, they can't just get in the car and drive away. They can maybe go outside and walk away, but everything in their life is controlled by their parents, even if they live in separate places, right? Where they go, what do they go shopping for school clothes, getting to school, getting home from school, even if they take the bus, what they eat, right? What events they do on the weekend. So much of their life is controlled by parents. So the only power that kids have, especially young kids, is their power of observation, their power of prediction, the ability to look and see that mommy is about to lose it, daddy is about to lose it, or daddy's about to withdraw, or mommy's about to withdraw, and then react accordingly. Maybe they go to mommy and daddy to soothe them, or make a joke, or be the clown, so it lightens the mood. Maybe they run away and go hide in their bedroom and play video games, or leave the house entirely. But that's the only power they have, the ability to observe, predict ahead of time, and react accordingly. So it's important you understand that from a developmental perspective, and the fact that they are in that impossible loyalty bind because they love both parents. And they don't often have the maturity until much later, late teens, even early adulthood, to truly understand more of the realities of what both or one or the other parent went through. So there's a few clinical principles that matter here about talking to your children. First, don't speak negatively about the other parent to your child. Full stop. This is non-negotiable. I know this can feel deeply unjust when the other parent is behaving badly and talking shit about you, but the research is unequivocal. Children who are exposed to parental alienation, denigration, or triangulation, they suffer significant psychological harm. And that harm is associated with the exposing parent's behavior, regardless of what the other good parent is doing. You cannot control what your ex says, but you can control what you say. So don't get sucked into that game. Second, give children age-appropriate validation of their experience without confirming or denying adult narratives. So what do I mean by this? If your child says, "Mom and Dad fight a lot," an appropriate response might be, "I know it's been really hard. That's not your fault. And we both love you very much." That would be a more appropriate response. Don't say something like this: "Yes, because your father does such and such, and he's a jerk," right? Now you're triangulating. Now you're denigrating that other parent. And by the way, if you happen to be the parent that is the toxic ex, and you're denigrating or triangulating or alienating your kids from your ex, I'm guessing you're probably not listening to these type of podcasts, but I would love it if you are. And I'd love it if you reach out to me for coaching, because that is something we can turn around and fix. Because quite often it is built off of just a lot of difficult emotion. But if you are that parent, it's important to understand that even though it might feel cathartic and an emotional release to talk about your ex in that way, it's not good for the kids. The research is very clear on this. So the third thing to take away about talking from your children: provide predictability and routine within your household. After the chaos of separation, the most powerfully regulating thing you can offer your child is a calm, consistent, safe environment in your home. That is more healing than any conversation. So now I want to give you some closing reflections. If you're in a high conflict post-divorce situation, I want you to hear this clearly. You do not have to make peace with your ex to make a good life for your children. You can still have peace in your life without having peace with your ex. What you do have to do is you have to make peace with the situation. You have to find a structure that protects your kids and protects yourself without requiring the other person to change. Parallel parenting is not a defeat. It is not giving up on the ideal. It is a clinically grounded, research-supported recognition that some situations require a different architecture, one that prioritizes your children's well-being and your own psychological survival over the appearance of a collaborative relationship that isn't actually possible. So with that, who gives a shit what the Joneses are doing? You need to figure out what is going to work for you and your kids and your ex. And sometimes parallel parenting is the way to go. Remember, protect your energy, protect your nervous system, and be the stable, regulated, loving presence your children need you to be. That is what will matter most. And the sooner that your kids see that, the better off they are going to be emotionally and psychologically. If today's episode resonated and you're ready to continue this work, I invite you to check out my workbook, The Conflict Whisperer: From Conflict to Clarity. It's a practical, no BS guide to rebuilding self-trust, strengthening boundaries, and navigating relationships with clarity instead of fear. It's available now on Amazon. And as I noted, I'll leave a link in the show notes. And also remember, insight without action changes nothing. If you're ready to turn healing into momentum and clarity into confidence, coaching can be the catalyst. Reach out. I see many people with these issues, and I've been coaching for many years. You can find me at www.theunstressedexec.com or on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as The Unstressed Exec. Until next time, I'm Dr. George Vergolias. Thanks for listening. And remember, shift happens.